This is the City Council workshop for May 15th, 2024. City Clerk, would you do the roll call, please?
Councilmember Sell.
Here.
Councilmember Papalardo.
Here.
Councilmember Stevenson.
Here.
Mayor Chezet.
Here.
Vice Mayor Butlin.
Here. All right, we are meeting to discuss Chapters 7 and 10 of the proposed Land Development Code. Mr. Bapp.
Thank you very much. I'm Stephen Bapp, Growth Management Director. I will be giving this workshop's presentation. Future workshops may be given by other members of staff to be determined. So we're going to cover two topics tonight. There are a lot of technical aspects to these two items, a lot of engineer input, a lot of illustrations that'll be coming in a separate appendix that'll accompany this chapter. The first one is circulation and parking, then subdivision site design, and then we'll have some discussion and input from the members of the council. As other chapters, we've taken our current LDC, which has had scatterings of regulations which handle parking and circulation through parking zones and such throughout our LDC, and we've placed them under one chapter in a more sequential, efficient manner. I'm going to go over some of the highlights of what we've added or changed. First of all, we've added the provision that all platted streets shall be public unless approved otherwise by the City Council. We've stated that street design, construction, and material standards shall mandate, adherence to pertinent guidelines. There are many different pertinent guidelines which apply to here. There's probably 15 different regulatory agencies that may control our street design, so it's very technical. These certain illustrations will be placed in a supplementary technical manual and will be appendix to the LDC, much like the Live Local Act was an appendix to the LDC. State and county roads must adhere to respective governing standards. Street intersection requirements are revised to include a minimum distance mandated of 120 feet from alleyway intersections with local streets. This improves our traffic flow in our smaller subdivisions. Also, other than street circulation, we also have street lighting. We're going to have street lighting which complies with dark sky principles. I'm not an expert, but basically what dark skies does, it restores nighttime environment and protects the communities from harmful effects of light pollution. It'll reduce glare, reduce intrusion on neighboring properties, and may allow our children to maybe even see the stars at night as time goes by. We're going to have spacing requirements that are scaled according to street design and intensity of the street. So streets like 1792 will have more intense lighting. Your local streets will have security lighting that's not quite as intense, and will also help us support our Dark Skies initiative. There's also some curb and gutter regulations have been updated to meet modern environmental and other DOD or DOT standards. We're going to codify our street sign hierarchies. We do have this in policy, and we have been implementing these techniques, but we're going to have the different types of street signs based on the classification. Our city streets will have the city logo on the left side. Another private gated non-public, private non-gated streets will not have the logo, but will be indicated as shown on the slide. We do have this as practice, but we're going to codify it now in the LDC. Other things, we're going to standardize our pedestrian crosswalks to be compliant with FDOT ADA and MUTCD standards. We're going to have regulations aligning with FDOT complete streets. We're going to have a sidewalk minimum width. We're going to raise it from 5 feet minimum to 8 feet, which parallel our public streets. Pedestrian access requirements will be established for neighborhoods and community and commercial facilities. They've been standardized and they meet all regulatory guidance, which they did not have that clarity before. We're going to add maintenance responsibilities. Things such as sidewalk improvements must be completed before the maintenance responsibility is transferred to the city. We have connectivity to our local parks and trails separate from sidewalks, which would be a 6-foot minimum pedestrian walkway to our trailheads. We also have low-impact design treatments, which are go along the green principles, which would be beneficial to the city. We also have standards for renovating existing non-conforming driveways, aprons, and curb cuts. I just want to note that the regulations would apply to new developments going in. When a sidewalk, curb, street becomes damaged, moved, repaired, then it would have to meet the current standard. We're not going to make everybody in the city of DeBary now modernize their street curb cuts. That's a little implausible. But when things come in for redevelopment, that's when the new standards would be applied. We have parking guidelines for minimum maximums, which are more consistent with current principles, including adding a requirement of bicycle parking. We have on-street parking regulations established, which are different than people parking in a local neighborhood. This is for new developments, outlining the parallel parking requirements. Parking and traffic control, some things fall within our code of ordinances, which are separate than our land development regulations. I don't want to get those two concepts confused. And we've added parking garage standards. Currently, we have no parking garages, but in the future we may. We don't know what the future holds, but we've added standards for those garages. We've revised our parking table to be clearer, and we've also added some, throughout the LDC, minimum dimensions for alleys and curbing. Some of those were already in our TOD regulations, but we've added clarity to other areas of the city. So that's really parking and circulation, and it's a very technical chapter, but those are the highlights and only the highlights. Chapter 10, which is our subdivision design, again, taking a scattering of hard to piece together regulations for subdivisions and putting them under one concise chapter. So we have design for lot layouts, we have stormwater management, and we have utility management for subdivisions, all under one section. So what's changed, what's added? We've added design criteria to have low impact development standards, which come from the Florida Green Book. We have a lot of these standards already in our TOD, but these would be applied to new neighborhoods, which would be outside our TOD. We're going to clean up the LDC to be specific about flag lots. Flag lots is illustrated in the drawing. In the dark shaded lot, it's a flag lot. I know there are some older ones in the western portion of our city, which will remain in existence and will continue to be able to exist. But flag lots do cause a lot of problems with measurements of setbacks, density, and intensity measurements. So we're going to prohibit the creation of any new flag lot, which is really consistent with modern planning principles. We're going to remove, there's a lot of outdated provisions left over from the county. We're going to eliminate and start fresh. We also have really increased our stormwater management to incorporate green stormwater infrastructure and low impact designs. Our engineer can talk more about that. He's much more of an expert than I. We're creating new standards for stormwater management and maintenance requirements of the stormwater systems, basically outlined in a lot of the bullets on the slide here. Thought I missed a slide, but maybe I didn't. So those were the very brief overview of our, probably two of our most technical chapters, which are parking and circulation and subdivisions. So I would gladly like to hear your thoughts, direction, anything you may want to add at this time.
City Clerk, do we have public participation?
No, ma'am, we do not.
Okay, Councilmember Sell.
I like this. The current sidewalks, like say Shell Road, they're fairly narrow right now. Golf carts seem to be allergic to using them. We also have a lot of residents that seem to like to block the sidewalk constantly. So that way the golf cart has to go off into the road again and then come back in. Is there some timeline for widening sidewalks that are currently here now, or is this just for future sidewalks?
Well, okay, so there's two things. That would be for future sidewalks, but if a site, it's going to be over time. If a site's redeveloped, that time then we would go in and have the new sidewalk requirement happen. I mean, unless we want to, at one date in the future, we may mandate certain sections to be widened. That's, a fiscal decision. That's, but right now it would be for new developments or redevelop properties or parcels.
And a lot of this will go into effect as soon as we lift the,
Correct. Once the land development code is adopted at the second reading by the city council, then it will go into effect that day.
same thing with like the dark sky, the
Correct.
lighting and
Right.
all that. Yeah.
Yes,
The people ask me where we watch rocket launches in DeBerry, so
Yeah.
it can be difficult with all the noise from the lights, so. And
That's the intent of,
same thing, new street signs with the city logo on it, that's just something that's going to be for new neighborhoods.
yeah, that will be a requirement for new neighborhoods going in. How we handle the existing neighborhoods, that could be something over time. Redevelopment would trigger the code requirement to do that.
If the sign got vandalized a year from now, then possibly they would put up a
Correct,
new sign.
yeah,
yeah.
correct.
Oh, okay, thank you so much.
Yep.
One comment, there is, all our signs have got stickers on them. Typically, a lot of them have Volusia County stickers on them. And we kind of identify, if we see a sign, who's putting this sign up. And sometimes some of these signs pop up, they're not the city of DeBerry or they're not Volusia County. There's somebody else sticking up some of these signs that, whether it's an HOA or anything else. So really kind of identify whose signs they are and where they're coming from. Because there's a few signs that pop up and going, wow, where did that come from?
I think these are street signs, though, that they were speaking of, names of streets.
Correct. Street
signs.
name signs,
Names
yeah.
of streets.
My bad,
Okay,
Yeah.
my bad. So.
okay. Councilmember Papalardo.
I have no comments, thank you.
Councilmember Stevenson.
No questions, thank you.
Vice Mayor Butlin.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Mr. Batt, curb and gutter. Now, I'm assuming that what we're talking about here is developments, subdivisions. If a
Right.
person has a lot that's not developed and they want to develop, what code do they follow?
Well, where are they at?
Oh, let's say in town, across the street, there's an empty lot they want to build. These standards are for subdivisions. What happens to those single-family lots that are undeveloped right now?
Those would be infill lots.
Okay.
And then they would, whatever is in that neighborhood, I believe that's what we would, yeah,
So they have to be consistent with it. So they,
consistent with that. Because we do, in the surrounding area here, the older neighborhoods that were platted and built in 1960s, we're not going to say you have to come in 2024 standards there.
well, you talked about the aprons.
If there's a new subdivision that goes in, they buy out a bunch of homes,
They
they
have
put in a
to-
new subdivision, then they would
They would
build
have
to
to
that
follow.
standard.
Okay.
But just someone buying in a vacant lot and putting a home on the vacant lot, that's a different,
Okay.
handled with a different way.
Okay, thank you. And then parking. I have a problem right now, existing, on current developments that are being built, that the roads in front of the homes are not wide enough. So if you have a car and a car, you have to finagle yourself to get around them, which, in my opinion, should be one side of the street parking only. Now, in my neighborhood, in my area, I'm going to advise their HOA to do that, to just have one side of the street parking. A FedEx truck can't get through. A UPS truck, if there's, the older section, they're a little wider, but the newer sections are so narrow. And I think I've talked with Richard about this a while back. Where is that rule that,
Well, there is.
There is no rule.
Well, no, there is. There is a street profile.
okay,
We have a rural street profile, a local street profile. Not in the slide presentation, but in the manual.
I
or
tried
the
to read it, but it was.
Document.
I was getting lost.
Where was I going? So, yeah, so there is a requirement for a minimum travel lane, north and south minimum travel lane, and then if you have parallel parking, then there's a parallel parking space width that's dictated too.
Okay.
I know not everything's perfect in DeBerry, and there are those narrow,
It's a brand new,
Formerly-
it's a brand new development.
I didn't make it.
And it was a standard that was before me, because I wouldn't have approved that if I was up here and you say we need to, I would have widened the streets. But it's very time-consuming and hazardous when, like I say, even the delivery trucks can't get through, garbage trucks can't get through if there's people on two sides of the street, because it's just that narrow. And I'm talking, these are bigger trucks.
I mean,
But-
we have like, for example, we've approved the DeBerry Town Park, and the east-west streets have travel lanes, which are whatever, 12-foot
Wide-
travel
wide
lanes.
enough.
And then they also have a parallel parking lane next to that travel lane. So that's compensated for that,
But they're,
that problem was solved with
right,
some of those
in some of those areas,
designs.
because they have parallel
I understand what
parking.
you're saying about
Yeah.
driving through. I've been in those neighborhoods
Yeah.
outside of DeBerry, which have that complexity too. But
Okay. I was just wondering where it was in here, 7-8. I'll read that, and if I have any other comments, I'll email you, but I think that was all I had.
Richard has.
Oh, Richard,
He's
yes.
Our engineer.
I
so
would
he-
love to hear from you.
If I could chime in a little bit.
Sure.
This is one of the reasons we want to follow, and it's kind of scattered here for the references, but the Florida Green Book, the latest and greatest, that's not even out yet. It's the 2023 red line version available right now.
Yay.
But they also have a traditional neighborhood development manual that specifically incorporates for whenever there's on-street parking in a residential development. It grows the pavement width by 7 feet. That's including the curb gutter as well, for purposes of having that additional space
Space
for
to-
that.
okay.
And whether it's on one side or both sides of the street, that's something I'm sure we can coordinate with through the developer's agreement, just considering the aesthetics of the community, like what the feel of the community is going to be. But at least we now have a provision that would allow widening that pavement for that purpose.
Okay. And you said when the house needs to get redone, driveway, apron, they have to conform to the current,
Correct. yeah.
okay. That's all. I think I'm good. Thank you.
And especially that not only applies to like a residential, but like our commercial. Let's say along 1792, we have a cafe and it has 50 feet of a driveway apron on one side, and then the corner side it has 35 feet. I mean, things like that would be brought up to standard to make a more safe traffic flow type environment.
Never makes sense.
Yeah, not just residential, but commercial and industrial too.
Okay.
So I didn't mean to cut.
No,
No problem.
thank you.
No problem. Okay. I am reading this with thinking of real-life illustrations in our city, and particularly areas near where I live, where I travel every day. I'm very glad to see that we want to include the green stormwater infrastructure and low-impact design from the new guidance. And I have been thinking about some of what I suspect is in there, and it relates to stormwater management. I'm interested in bioswales. And then I also have concerns about our existing private road developments, and what of these amendments would apply when something changes on one of those private roads. So first on the bioswales. The curb and gutter, I guess, could still be mandated with the bioswale on the other side, a curb, a 10-foot sidewalk, trail, and then a bioswale instead of a pipe structure. When I think of High Banks, West High Banks, and the area of Fort Florida Road that still needs infrastructure, I know that we have thought about putting the pipes in. That's what we did all the way down High Banks till you got to the railroad tracks. I'm thinking that if we don't have something that's broke, and we own what is essentially a bioswale, that we don't give it away and spend millions of dollars putting a pipe there. So I'm hopeful that this rewrite, embracing these, will also be written in such a way that there is some thought to how it would translate in areas of our city where it could apply. And I don't want there, I don't want bioswales on West High Banks and Fort Florida Road to be dismissed out of hand because some other regulation here says you have to do this. I'm not saying that the existing drainage ditches, bioswales, may not be appropriate in some sections. But actually in front of Rivington, Rivington preserved that structure due to the rural flavor that it gave Fort Florida. We were preserving the tree canopy, and they purposely did not put pipes down there. And I think I was in the DRC meetings when some of this was discussed. They said, we thought you might like it to remain more consistent with the character of that road. And so we have all the way through Rivington, we will pretty much preserve that structure. In some preliminary discussions of what might happen if the property adjacent to Alexander Island is developed, and then in that section where the city will have to plug in. My personal belief is that Hennon should have had to bring it down to the corner, but he got away with his last entrance to his subdivision. So the city bears the responsibility from that last entrance to Section 9 of Riviera Bella to the corner of Fort Florida Point and Fort Florida. And we've had some discussions. We even have it tentatively in some of our wish list for the next 5 years, kinds of things that we will address drainage there. I personally can't recall any flooding along there. Those bioswales that exist have been deep enough to accommodate stormwater, even after hurricanes, even after Faye. So I would like whatever we do here, I'm not saying I have the answer or I think that's what has to happen there, but I would like what we do here not to forestall that kind of thinking in areas of our city where we still have work to do, and these areas would fall under this new code. That's one concern. I voiced it here so that everybody's heard it publicly, and I would hope that the way the code is written, and with the embracing of the green stormwater infrastructure low impact design, that there would be enough in this code to allow that consideration and not have it a foregone conclusion that we're putting in pipes during West High Banks, west of the river, and all of the part of Fort Florida that still needs to be handled. We do have pipes up to the last entrance to Riviera Bella, and then we have swales to the end of Rivington. So there will be a change at some point. But I think that we need to go into this carefully, and like I say, my personal feeling is I haven't seen a flooding issue there. If we already have a free bioswale, I'm not sure we should spend $1 million putting something else in because it's consistent with what happened at Riviera Bella. My 10 or 15 cents worth there.
Can I?
I have some other
Go ahead.
points. Also, I am concerned about how this will apply. You say it doesn't apply until somebody does something. I live on a private road. When we paved it, we checked and there was no need for a permit. And we paved it according to what we had in our pocketbook to take it from sand, which was our responsibility to maintain, and nobody on the street took the responsibility except for one household. And so we paved the street, we checked there was no need for a permit, and we paved it according to what we could do that would provide paved access to 15th Street and River Drive. And that pavement exists in its current format, and it all comes out of our pockets, but there is no structure. So in a practical sense, it comes out of a couple of people's pockets, and the others chip in if they feel like it because there's no HOA. I would not want this code, if we need to do a partial repaving of that road, to mandate that we now meet for that road new standards, curb and gutter, 6 inches deep of whatever. because the city has not invested anything there, rightfully so, it's private. Similarly, if our driveways go into this road, that would be a modification of a driveway. Would we be, talks about curbs and gutters and distances and all of that. These driveways exist. If there's a new driveway put in somewhere, does it have to meet this code now, even though it's on a private road that has pavement that is not standard? These are the concerns I have with living in that situation. But I also submit to you Orlandia Heights. Orlandia Heights has their association, but they maintain drivability on those streets by using millings. And there's nothing in this code that would talk about millings being acceptable, and there could be some sort of new initiative for small stretch that's still sand. Does that trigger this code for that? We need to make sure, I think, because Orlandia Heights is big, and that's a lot of road. And the Neighborhood Improvement Association and the special tax district that provides for that was an effort by the city to work with these residents to keep their access passable and keep the financial responsibility on them. I would not want the new code to do something to disrupt what has been an acceptable way for Orlandia Heights residents to have ingress and egress to their properties. That's real long-winded. Have at it.
Well, do you want to talk about private? And go ahead.
Yeah,
I'll refer over to Richard. He's more eloquent on this topic.
some of those points are exactly what we were going back and forth and not wrestling, but trying to understand how some of these communities did not qualify for subdivision regulations in terms of infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So in terms of infrastructure, the roadside swales, bioswales, that it's not applicable to all communities. I think the intent of our code is to allow flexibility. Just because we're referring to the DOT for the traditional neighborhood developments, it doesn't mean that the roadways are urban section with curb and gutter. They could very well easily be rural section. We did not remove, we currently have in our code rural roadway sections, and we also have urban. We purposely kept them because we want to offer that flexibility.
But what about private, where it's all coming out of the pockets of the homeowners? It's not the city doing this, and it's not a new developer doing it. Sure. It is the property as it exists now and has historically been, and it's the owners who have to do it, and none of us could bring these things up to code.
No, for private communities, private maintained roadways, we have nothing to do but offer guidance.
Right. Is that codified here? I know your good heart. I'm not worried about you. I'm not worried about our city manager. I'm not worried about Mr. Bapp. But I don't want this new codified code to bring something else down in the future when you're not here, I'm not here, Mr. Bapp's not here, Mr. Rosamunda's not here, and there is no clarity that that was the understanding, that those private communities that pay for all their own sewer, all their own stormwater and road maintenance are not,
Well, I think
not subject to this.
Mayor, if I may input here,
Yeah.
the existing private streets and everything else, we have a prime example in, what's it called, St. John's Estates or Fife Road.
Right.
Right.
But the main issue is not necessarily the construction of the road. It's the permitted with the St. John's Water Management District and how that stormwater is going to be
But
managed in that particular
that's
area.
stormwater, but I'm also talking road paving.
Yeah, true.
Two
but-
together.
True, and so based upon the stormwater management there, whether it's curb and gutter and they have to put a retention pond in or allow it to be non-urban and allow it to flow with bioswales, that's really permitted through the St. John's Water Management District. I think most of this in here is for new private developments. For example, if Riverbend North does come, it seems like it's probably going to be a private gated community. Then a lot of these factors will play a part into new private developments. But as far as the older ones, it seems like the St. John's Water Management District plays a much greater role when we take private streets from dirt to asphalt, really the major concern is more stormwater than it is the design of the road and whether it's curb and gutter or just regular paving.
Can we, in this code, include somewhere that private roads that existed prior to 2024 would not be governed by certain of these new standards?
We could do that.
Yeah.
I think that that's important. You would never want a future council to put this on Orlandia Heights. I mean, that's astronomical.
Well, there is,
And my little neighborhood, we wouldn't want it put on us
Now,
either.
there is, certain situations where on a private road, if there's a paved road already in a private road and you're creating a new road to get to your house, that road is dictated to be, you have to pave it. Because it is
right.
connecting off a paved road. And there are some requirements where they are required to pave when you do a new road to get to a specific house because it is connected to a paved road. And so there are some of those regulations in there that requires certain private roads to be paved. But again, that's what we're going through with some of the private communities here that are, it seems like the St. John's Water Management District is kind of dictating on how style that road should be and how the stormwater occurs.
Okay, I'm thinking of mainly Orlandia Heights and these certain smaller communities. I don't want anything in this code to add city requirements for these circumstances where it has been just, in some circumstances like mine, whoever lives there is legally responsible, but nobody's forced to because there's no mechanism to force them, and that nobody's going to put a mechanism in to force them. And so you get to, you have a situation where the existing owners have figured out how to run their little neighborhood and make it work, but putting a new superstructure of requirements there would be untenable. So I wouldn't want this written so tightly that that wasn't a carve-out, you know? And as far as my comments on the bioswales, I think that I'm just putting it out there to say, as we decide going down the road, whatever is in here would encourage bioswales, and I think that we ought to think about how it would translate. That is a capital infrastructure project that is predictably going to come before this council in the next 10 years. Probably sooner, but I can't say. Now, Vice Mayor Butland, you wanted to speak to that piece of it.
Yes. Coming down from High Banks to Fort Florida, I know there are sidewalks, and we talked about extending the trail from High Banks all the way down to Fort Florida. You're talking about leaving the swales the way they are. Where does the trail come into play? Where does it end? Where does it connect to if we're trying to connect everything and yet wanting to leave the bioswales there?
Well, I will tell you, I've looked at it.
Okay.
First of all, we won't need a trail on both sides of
No,
that street.
correct.
So you're really looking for 10 feet,
Okay.
okay?
And there's enough
And
all
I
the way
think that
down?
you could have the pavement closer to the bioswale over here and
The sidewalk.
the 10 foot on one side. But I'm not the engineer.
Yeah.
And I recognize that. I'm just asking that as we move forward, we at least give consideration. How are we going to go from one kind of water management to another? Yes, we do have land for a retention pond there. I'm on West High Banks, and I'm not saying that's not needed. The houses we bought flooded. But that is where the water can end up there, even with not putting pipes in necessarily, I think. And it certainly doesn't speak to the existing bioswales past Riviera Bella and down to the first corner at Rivington. And as I say, to my recollection and my knowledge, there has been no flooding of Fort Florida there to that corner. Now, we did have a thing with Rivington's construction that flooded it just east of there. and that was a construction matter, and you all addressed it, and it ended, and it's not going to happen again. But the section that I'm speaking of doesn't, to my knowledge, have flooding issues. And there is a benefit to the water from flowing through the vegetation in those swales. It cleans the water before it gets back to the St. John's, something that a concrete pipe may not do. So I would hate to, without thought and knowing why we were doing it, walk away from something we already own for free and spend millions of dollars putting in something else. I think we could spend the money somewhere else if we're not solving a problem. So this was just reading all of this just triggered my thoughts on this, and I share them publicly. I would appreciate if the final rewrite has something that does preserve some leeway for existing private roads, as in Orlandia Heights, as 15th Street and River Drive, and within St. John's Woods, who does need to work with the St. John's River Management Authority for whatever they're doing, because they have stormwater management that is beyond rebuilding the culvert that we had to do. So that's my input. Is there any further input from you, City Manager?
No, we just to let you know, I mean, Richard and I and Steve have been talking in great lengths about the West High Banks project, and yeah, we were looking at piping it, but certainly Richard has come up with a lot of what they call green infrastructure. That's not piping,
Thank you, Richard.
but it's not open either.
Okay.
There are some updated, what we call green infrastructure, where you can still put a system in place that you can still cover over, and you can still put a trail on top. And
Right.
it still allows the water to flow. It still allows water to be treated before it gets to the St. Johns River. And so,
I wouldn't be against that on the south side, where we would need to put in the retention pond. If you brought it to a vote tomorrow night, I would vote against it on the north side. Again, I'm not sure that's solving a problem, and it costs money to do that. And that would give you even more leeway for your 10-foot trail on that side.
I know the
No,
trail has to connect.
I know, it
and I'm
does,
just trying to
and I
figure
was
out-
looking at it
I
too.
haven't, I didn't go out and measure. I'm sure
Yeah.
you looked at it
So,
and said, there's
anyway,
10 feet. I
There
just
is, there's
chose
at
not
least
to do
5
that.
feet on either side.
Okay.
But anyway, Richard, I appreciate that, and
Yes,
this.
thank you, everyone.
This rewrite just reminded me of the things I've been bouncing around in my head for the last little while, particularly as we've mentioned again, that in our medium-term plan, we need to do the West High Banks stormwater management, and then somewhere in the next 5 to 10 years, we need to do the Fort Florida stretch that it redounds to the city, because the existing community that I live in was platted in the 50s, and there's no developer there to say it was your job, so.
well, and just since we got a few minutes here, but just for long-range planning, I mean, the Kalen Street to Fort Florida Point, that's the stretch that we're talking about there. There are opportunities when the development comes in, if it does come in at River Bend North, to go ahead and facilitate water heading that particular direction.
But you can do that with the proper slope in the existing.
Yeah, but filtering it through their particular system and then out to the river.
And that's fine too.
Yeah.
But I don't think that those are mutually exclusive ideas. Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, we stand adjourned.
Awesome.